Capacity building, gain or drain. Our next speaker Dr. Jean-Marcel Riboud, the Director, Generation Challenge Program. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Ahmed. Okay, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank Peter, I'd like to thank Rita for the very kind invitation, and I will try to entertain you before lunch, which is always a challenge. I'm going to share quite some experience that we learned with the Generation Challenge program, and therefore my first slide is to show a bit what kind of beast the GCP is about. So we are one of those challenge programs hosted at CIMMYT. We are created about 10 years ago, and we are a time-bound initiative. And in fact, we are going to close officially in December this year. Over those 10 years, we got 170 millions, which is quite a substantial resource. You have the major donor listed, and we really focus our research on drought-prone environments. We started with a lot of mandated crops within the CGIAR, and during phase 2, the last 5 years, we focused on 5 crops. What we are really about is about accessing the genetic diversity, advancing plant science, and promoting, access to this modern science to improve crop for greater food security in the developing world. And we do not conduct research ourselves. We are a broker in plant science, really bridging the gap between upstream and applied science. The presentation today will deal with some approaches on capacity building. I will expose, a kind of interesting multi-year course approach. Talk a bit about brain drain issue, access to technology, challenges, perspectives, and conclusion. So some approaches, and here it's really about some experience we got. We can probably classify those approaches into different categories. The more classic ones that are around postgrad training program, the workshops, fellowship travel grant, PhD student MSc embedded in different research activity, training people for them to become the trainer, and communities of practice. We can come back on this community of practice issue in the discussion because it's a bit challenging, but it's now quite expanded as a nice way to bring people together and to exchange. We have 2 different kind of communities of practice. The ones that are project-based and the one that are social media-based. Perhaps a bit less common that we try to achieve through the GCP was capacity building a la carte, where really we were coming to a certain project and said to people, we have a certain amount available, how you'd like to use it. Tell us what you can do today, okay, and how we can help you to do your job and achieve your objectives. We also have this multi-year course, and I will tell you more about this in a few minutes. And also we are conducting some capacity building along delivery chains. So really not only the scientist, but also the technician and the station manager. And believe it or not, this is almost the station manager that the short term give you the largest return. We also provide some support in terms of acquisition of some infrastructure, not only providing money to people, but really asking some experts, some engineer, to go on the ground and really advise people what kind of pump, what kind of fan, what kind of technology they should have so that it's sustainable and really helping them to implement their infrastructure. Also put some thought about whom to train. It's not obvious. As you know, we said in the jargon that you have the classic suspect, that I'll go to every training to get the fee and etc. So how you also deal with this issue about the young generation versus the senior generation, etc. So also quite some thoughts to put here. Just one example of a kind of training that we supported is the genotyping support service. So there we really try to have quite a number of small grants, not more than $10,000, embedded in the research activity, really to support the genotyping content of the research. And doing so, we provide access to genotyping service laboratory to our partners in developing countries at a very, very low cost. So this was very nice because, again, it was a support. It exposed them to accessing the technology. And in fact, since we initiated with our major partner, LGC, here we have generated 32 million data points. So I think it's a nice way for people to get exposed to this technology, and again, to see how it's not too complicated, and probably even more important, they don't need to have the infrastructure. Now there's a lot of people outside that take care of the technology for you. In total, we had about 170 projects. We invested almost $2 million. And as you can see, it was for 18 crops and across 35 countries. So that was quite a successful approach. Now, just to illustrate a bit this multi-year course idea that germinated about 3 years ago, and it was really, you know, those punctual course, really at the end of the day, I mean, it doesn't serve a lot of purpose because people go in, they get out, and they end, and then it's very difficult to see if they really benefit from the course. So we thought, why don't we have a course that people have to follow over years, okay? And why don't we make it a bit progressive with the kind of technology that's available and how they are going to manage their crop cycle. So we really focus in 3 years, a course of 2 weeks, okay? And where we were first thinking about the content of year one, it was really about the project, establishment, more about phenotypic data. The second year was more about, okay, revisiting some of the results of the analysis conducted during the first year, bringing the molecular markers components, and again, on year 3, coming back to what has been learned from year 1 and year 2, and to really help people to digest and put in application what they learn. We had 3 groups of people from East Africa, Central Africa, East and South, West and Central, and also South and Southeast Asia. And we train 180 people per year over 3 years. The key issue here is that really they were asked to be able to be elected to come to the next year to arrive with some very clear homework done. It related to data management, to application of the statistic, to have their data in the database, and to be able to show some plan for a molecular marker application. Without this, they will not be elected to come to year 2. So here you have the number of people and where they are located that we train. About 170 breeders overall, 10 crops, 31 countries all over the world, and those people were trained basically on modern breeding. Now, we realized also recently that, in fact, it's not really only about the knowledge per se, but it's really about promoting and nurturing the development of a community of users. When you have people that met every year for 3 years, for 2 weeks, you really create a very strong community. And doing so, you also establish a solid base for sustainable adoption. And therefore, your trainees become trainers, mentors, champions, ambassadors. And this is really very nice that now, again, we build and disseminate a platform that I will introduce to you in a few minutes, that we have all those people all over the world that know who we are and are ready to stand up to tell the world, hey, that's quite nice. I've been trained on this platform, and I know it will be very, very helpful. Perhaps one idea is that we can adjust to crop cycle instead of making per year. Perhaps meeting every year it's a bit challenging, but it's definitely a very good model to apply at the regional level. How to avoid people to leave the country once they have been trained. Here you have some numbers. You have the total African labor force, about 220 million. These are numbers that are from 19 and 2000. Sorry, it's a bit updated, but I think the principle is the same. You see that skilled labor represent about 3 to 4%. Skilled labor meaning people who have passed secondary school. You have here the immigration rate of those people, and you can see that from those immigrants, you have a large portion who are really educated people. And when you're looking more specifically about the level of education, you see that, of course, the numbers are even more dramatic for like PhD students. And when you look about, some specific country in Africa, you can see that it can be really devastating, and you have really the people leaving the country. How to deal with this? First, there is 3 different kind of brain drain, I would say. First, within the country, public-private, then across African countries, and then Africa versus outside. So if we look about, sorry, I'm clicking on my computer, but not on the right one. So if we talk about really within the country, without any doubt, there is a shift, for people who have been trained in the public sector to move to the private sector and also to international institutions in country. And you know why? Better term of services, better facilities, better salaries, opportunity to have access to some good technology and some benefits in terms of commercialization. Now, we are also, of course, having losing scientists to developed world, and it's all what is in the first category, plus, of course, accessing cutting-edge science, opportunity for international recognition, publications, and continue to develop your professional development. So brain drain is inevitable as long as this disequilibrium will exist, and in fact can only be mitigated. And you can mitigate it in different ways. First, that's policy that's currently in place. People or governments who provide some support to their young scientists then ask them to come back and stay on board for several years. They also ask them, in fact, to work at a reasonably good salary and try to keep them on board. They also try to favor, migrations or rotation across different programs and countries. And there are also some plans, as you know, for trying to attract native professionals to come back to the country. The Chinese case is a typical example, but it's quite controversial. What is really probably much more important is really what I listed under potential institutional measures. And this is, salary is okay, people can deal with this, but where they really get frustrated is that they cannot do and put in practice what they learn. And this is a pity. So, they don't have the right facility, they don't have the right equipment, and basically they are in the office just sitting and, getting mad and et cetera. So there is a must, when we talk about capacity building, to talk about technology transfer and access to the technology. And then at the end, you have some more policy strategic changes that can help to overpass this challenge. But again, going back to this point of accessing the technology, how you can link really capacity building with access of the technology. And I will show you the example of the integrated breeding platform. So this is a platform that has been, we started to develop about 5 years ago, and it's basically to improve the efficiency of plant breeding program in developing countries by enabling plant breeders to access modern breeding technologies, services, breeding material, and related information in a centralized, integrated, and practical manner. And it's also, of course, to encourage people to work together. Sorry, I will really apologize because they are not connected. I click here and not here. So you have the objectives that I just read. Okay, what this is about? Really, we are talking here about a central column vertebral that has 4 different components. It's about crop information. It's about the breeding management system. I don't want to enter into detail here, but it's basically an analytical pipeline that allows you to select your germplasm, make your crosses, your trials, make your statistical analysis, access molecular markers, all what the breeder needs on their day-to-day operation, you should be able to find it here. And as a capacity building component and social network component. So here I just represented the database that people can access. You have 2 different kinds of database, historical database here, and then a phenotypic and genotypic database that are related to your pipeline. You have access to breeding information, access to germplasm, genetic resources, crop ontology, extremely important to exchange data, and also set of predictive markers that can be used for genes that express a large percentage of the phenotypic variants. Then we are going to the services, and online you can access quite a number of services for genotyping and phenotyping. This LGC lab can be accessed here, and what only people need to do, they send a request to LGC through the portal, they get a plate, they punch the leaves, seal the plates, go it back to LGC, 3 weeks later, they get their data point. So again, for large scale or for application, you don't need to have the infrastructure locally anymore. And we have also professional support at the regional hubs on the bottom, and I will come back on this one later on. And then you have really a series of, knowledge and information that is quite relevant. And it starts with data management, good practices. You have manual tutorial, Atlas GIS. John will talk about this afternoon, and we are linked with the WARE initiative. Communities of practice, forum to solve problem, and an e-learning component. So as you can see, quite a comprehensive platform. And how do we disseminate the knowledge? The knowledge using the IBP is at different levels. First, developing the tutorial and the manual that will help people to use the tool, but also to access quite some theoretical information, academic information through different e-learning material and ready-to-use model. There is a curriculum for breeders in Africa currently under development, supported by the foundation with the Iowa State University that will use the IBP as their implementation mean, and we work, of course, a lot with local universities. So in one step, the users can really access academic courses, tutorial manual, tools and services to put the knowledge in practice, and they have also room for social medium and to develop active communities of practice. So we believe that, what we call an integrated approach, it's really learning as you go, that it's really a very, very valuable way of how to put capacity building in the context of I access what I need when I need it. Now, the soybean components, we have been luckily involved in the USAID field projects, and here you have few things that we have already done. So we establish, in relation to the BMS, we establish a soybean database, we establish a crop ontology, we establish a field book template, and we are working together with different partners to have communities of practice emerging from the platform. What still needs to be done is that we need to fill the database with much more data. That's what is currently there. Take care of the capacity building of African partners and provide the team also with electronic data capture device, okay? And IATA is the regional hubs for the breeding management system, and I'm sure will be very helpful to disseminate and help us with building this soybean community. Just a quick example, when you open the BMS, if you click on the soybean crop, you will have access to the soybean trait dictionary. There are about 81 traits that breeders selected. They have a unique identifier, a definition, and the methods to how to measure things and at scale. That really, again, is essential for people to exchange data across crops. Challenges? Well, sorry to be bold, but there are a lot of initiatives outside that take care of capacity building. And the question is that too many? And perhaps the question is not really, the question is perhaps too many in terms of the initiative, because there is plenty of work to be done. But are they really coordinated? Do they all need to develop their own training material and their own system? So again, there is plenty of room for all those initiatives, but probably a better coordination, to exchange and work together will help tremendously. And it's not easy. It's not easy. Another set of issues that I listed around capacity building is that, the classic questions, face-to-face versus online, remote teaching. Well, you can debate, I'm sure, for more than a day on that one. And there is pros and cons. Inside or outside the research framework, definitely based on the JCP experience, we believe that's important to do it inside, but you have some other organization that believe that outside is probably better for more transparency and et cetera. And again, there is no black and white answer. Where to invest? Human resources, the infrastructure, access to technology. Again, as I said, just to invest in capacity building just doesn't make it. So how do you balance your portfolio and your resource allocation is quite a challenge. Free or fees? This is another interesting one where you get a lot of debates and excitement when we put this on the table. Personally, we believe that free is not good. And that at least people who participate need to contribute to a certain extent. How you maximize your investment, okay? Yeah, it's good to offer different options, but you don't need to have, one option for everybody. And how to promote true partnership. I think this is another very key question, because it's a mix of competition and commission project that can do it, and probably you need to build on champion, okay? And if capacity building goes with sharing leadership, you have also the questions, do everybody want to become a leader? And for sure, the answer is no. Now, a point that is absolutely fundamental, also I was, claiming and telling that, capacity building must go with technology adoption and transfer, it's fundamental to understand that there is a major bottleneck there. Okay, technology development is not part of is the easiest part of the equation. Really, what is the challenge is how people change and how you support this change. And people are reluctant to change, even if they know that the change will benefit them. So it's not only about, they don't see the benefits. So it needs to be really bottom-up, it needs to be mandatory, and a critical element is really also that you have a very good local support for the adoption of the technology. I have 2 more slides. Looking at, Ahmed is looking at his watch. And of course, there is a big difference between the private and the public sector in terms of the enforcement. Now, just how we plan to make the BMS sustainable, it has 3 different levels. We will have a central team. We'll have with data management, analytical tool, capacity building and breeding. We are going to establish, and it's already ongoing, local help desk to help people on the day-to-day activities to help them to adopt and support the BMS for national programs, centers, regional organization, and this in 3 different parts of the world. And we are also going to have specific teams working with institutions for a customized and punctual support for just a few months for them to adopt the BMS. And when this is done, then they will be able to access the regional hubs here. And of course, these go back and forth. My last slide of conclusion, capacity building conducted in isolation really is of little value. That we like it or not, considering the difference and the evolution of the technology, the e-learning is growing and needs to be there and well established so that it is sustainable. Perhaps again, today the capacity building on technology per se, and even I will be provocative here, data analysis is decreasing honestly. And you have a lot of specialists and service providers that can do it for you. Rather than that, we should probably focus on strategic approach, adoption of good practices, data interpretation, and problem solving. Okay, we need to provide access to technology to put knowledge in practice. Brain drain is reduced if you are involved in exciting projects. The community network is a very important component, and there is a need to maximize capacity building effort across the different teams that are working on it. In that context, the learning by doing concept appear to be a very promising and sustainable approach. And here you have the photo of each of the 3 courses that were organized every year with the 170 people that we train on the BMS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions?
Hailu Tafera from USAID. Thank you for your nice presentation. And my question is, you showed us a lot of these markers in the database, but does your database contain some improved varieties developed using these markers by the communities of practices? So it would be interesting.
Yes, so first a point of clarification. Really the BMS and the platform we developed works for with or without markers. It is really for running any kind of breeding activities, for very simple conventional breeding to molecular markers. And yes, thanks to some project conducted in cassava, for example, in Nigeria, we have varieties that have been now released, and they're using markers. They have been able to improve some virus resistance. Same for rice, for phosphorus uptake efficiency, sorghum for aluminum tolerance. So for some major trait, large genetic effect, we have already access to some germplasm and the markers that can be used in a predictive way. And the idea that we are looking now in the literature is built on some of the projects that we supported through the GCP, but to put, of course, markers that have been generated by other teams and to bring them also on board. Because at the end, the platform is disconnected to the GCP. The GCP stopped in December, but the IBP platform will survive the GCP.
Thanks, Jean-Marcel. Great presentation. Pete Goldsmith, University of Illinois. Can you, I have to dumb this down for a social scientist, give me just a kind of a rough picture of a station manager going through the course. How do they interact with the course? It's 2 weeks, and then when they come back, mentors, private sector, take just through kind of very stylized view of how this interacts with the kind of the day-to-day of a station manager.
Yeah, sorry if I create some confusion. The 3-year course example that I was showing, this is for scientists. And for station manager, we have a special course. It's a punctual course of 1 week, where we have engineers. In fact, we are working with Anibal Mutar. I mean, he's a person who is really very knowledgeable, is working with his own network in Africa to train them on station practices, how you prepare the land, tractors, and etc. And this is with the same team that we work on the infrastructure. So when they need something, they work with a team. And we are going to put this course online. So it's not the same course. Sorry about this. The 3-year courses were more advanced and about breeding and analysis. This is for the scientist.
Is there a platform for these station managers, or it's just the direct training? Is there information online?
Yeah, absolutely. With Anibal we work, and we are going to have his course for station manager available online through the BMS. So the modules will be there. And honestly, as I said, it's important to consider all this chain. I mean, that because you train the scientist, you train the technician, and whoops, you realize that the fertilization of your land is not very good, or there's a lot of things that go wrong. So I think, again, this is something we learn, and you need specialized people, and they are not the same. You train, of course, different people with different resources based on the demand.
So thank you for the presentation. I'm an economist, Craig Gunnarsson from University of Illinois, and so I guess economists take a different perspective on these quote-unquote brain drains. That's a pejorative term. From our perspective, a brain drain is a good thing insofar as people are allowed to take their talents and go somewhere else and use those talents elsewhere, and that benefits, if we think about freedom of free trade, benefits everybody. Free trade in ideas, free trade in going across borders is really important. In fact, I would say it's a good thing if a country has brain drain, because it means that people are being trained well and their services are in demand elsewhere across the world. So I would actually be concerned if I was a country and I wasn't having people leaving, because that would signal perhaps that things are not going as well. So I would put on a positive thing is that the more people that leave the country, to some extent, that can be a bad sign, but it's not always a bad sign. Just like if you're exporting a lot of goods, that's generally seen as a good sign for a country. If you're exporting a lot of people, that can be seen as a good thing. So I just want to think it's not always negative people leaving the country. It can be quite positive as well.
I fully agree with you. It's a question of magnitude. And it's a question about which area. I will give you 2 examples. Once when I was postdoc at CIMMYT some time ago, we had a project supported by the Dutch government. It was to establish a molecular lab in Kenya and in Zimbabwe. And we trained a molecular breeder and a more conventional breeder in each country, 4 people, for 3 years. 2 years later, they were all gone. Those 4 guys were out in Australia, in Europe, putting their skills at the disposal of others, and of course, probably having a much better life than in their country. And then another one is that because we work and look for partners, we have champions in some national program. But those champions, they have shoulders like this, because you don't have so many. And then all the donors, all the implementer, they are PI on 10 projects. Because you don't find enough of those champions, they are good, they are skilled, and etc. So I see your point, and you're absolutely right. It's not always negative, but in research for development, in agriculture, when you look for some people you can really support in the national program, it's a real challenge. And it's not because the demand is not there. A slide I didn't present it, but when we did our survey to identify the 170 folks that we wanted to train, we got, almost 500 applications. We did a broad survey. Only about 15 or 20% of women. So there is an issue there, but we are aware of this. But the demand is there. The problem is that you train them, they get exposed, and as I said, and then it's very difficult to keep them. and private sector, but also a lot of our own organization. CGIAR employed, foundation employed a lot of people that are champions in the national program and then shift. So that's what I was referring, but your point is also well taken. It's also a good sign because you create bright people.
Tuolini Viba at the Michigan State University again. I thank you for the presentation. I agree with you. I've been in capacity building for the longest time, and I've gone through the same frustrations. The question is, what happens to these 170 people now, the breeders? If the program ends next year, what happens to the breeders?
So the breeders that we train here, they are not embedded necessarily in our research project. So they are really people working in national program. This was one of the conditions. Okay, I think a third of them are students, but 2/3 they are professional. So they have their life. And now that we are going to build on the IBP phase 2, again, didn't have time, and I overpassed my time already, but to tell you about the deployment stage. Now that the BMS is there, the second phase approved and supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is all about deployment. And we are going to build on those people that we train where they are, in the institution they are, to help us convincing their upper management that they need to convert the BMS and to adopt the BMS. And again, as I was telling, we need to have the buying of upper management, and what we are really looking at is that converting an institution or program. So it's sustainable, and again, it has really an impact in the country. Building on those people, is what I had this slide about. It's not about knowledge per se, it's building your team, your support team that will help you if they are happy with the product, and it seems that they are.
Jean-Marcel, Rita Mom at the University of Illinois. Thank you for sharing your insights on this important topic with us. I have a question that follows on the discussion of Craig's question. So you mentioned the emigration of professionals from national programs to private sector, or in the case of International Center. This isn't the brain drain I usually think of. When I'm thinking brain drain, I'm thinking leaving a particular country or a particular area where, for example, with plant breeding, the professional is working toward increased productivity in that region in his or her particular crop. But going back to the situation, the emigration from national programs to other programs, how do you see this impacting food security on a regional basis or a country basis?
I see where you're going, Rita. It's a very good question, but it's a policy issue. At the end, it is who is going to produce the food for tomorrow, right? And I think this is really an open question. So you're right, brain drain, you always think on the more classic, leaving the continents, or becoming an admin, which is another brain drain. Everybody, and it's happening in the north and the south. You're a good scientist, you're bright. Why don't you become a leader? And more often after you have a lot of not writing but typing. So, but then the shift from public to private, it's a much more difficult to answer, because again, you say where you need to put your effort. I mean, we are convinced that we need absolutely, to support national program. The BMS supports people in the national program to access new technology, but also SMEs. Again, didn't have a lot to really talk about this. And depending on where you are, the one who are making to make the difference are the small and medium-sized enterprise, because they are the one who are going to breed the seeds to the farmer. So you can see these perhaps at two levels: national program more on the pre-breeding, accessing new diversity, making crosses, and then working closely with people in the private sector to really match more crosses in multiplication, quality control, and seed distribution. They are complementary in this delivery chain. The problem is that you need probably a right balance between the two to have an efficient delivery chain. So it's not really, perhaps a comprehensive answer, but it's again about who is doing what. And it's so, as you know, more country specific. You have some country that that the public sector is so below that they will not do it. And you have other countries where they are leading and in fact teaching the private sector how, especially in Asia, how to do a good business with their seed. And being country now, it's official in China And at least China, for sure, they have a new policy that they want to get rid of breeding. And it's CAS. There's training and working with the SMEs just to teach them on how to do this. So they understood, this compartmentation and where everybody has the strengths.
There are two sides of capacity building. If I came to US, you train me at the top biotech or molecular geneticist. They send me back to West Africa. I come from West Africa, to an empty lab. After 2 years, I get frustrated. I start looking out to go where I can use my skills. So what are the things? Like if you look at biotech, we have several students. They train them, molecular breeding, all those things. When they go back, the labs are not there to do the work. For example, I know some students, they taught them SSR markers. I'm not a breeder. And we are vast in it. By the time they are doing it, they go to a message, now in Cornell, they are using SNP markers. Before they understand it, no, Cornell has gone beyond SNP markers. It's now more than that. And they don't have those equipment. So when you build the capacity, the knowledge, I think there should be some effort to maybe give them some capacity, the working environment. The Cacao Foundation UK, they use that model, they train you, they send them to US. When they go back, they go and put some labs to do the basic molecular breeding. And I know of 2 staff who are encouraging, can you join IITO? So they say, no, we are okay. We have some lab, we are doing our breeding. We are not really ready to leave now to go to CG. So I could see those people, if they did have that lab provided by Cacaos, but the moment you advertise the position and see it on IIT, they will apply to leave. So I think it's the working environment that we also go beyond the knowledge, but stay there with some infrastructure or equipment.
It's a very good point, and it's a sensitive issue about laboratories. But here I would be bold again and be a bit provocative. For laboratories, I think that it's not necessarily what needs to be done for large-scale screening. I think it's definitely good to have some local laboratories to train people, for people to be exposed to the technology locally. But as soon as you are going to do this in routine, I mean, no way that you can compete with the price of a service provider. And I think that, LGC, again, serve now all the world. They have, just to take them, we also do service, with BECA centers and etc. But this is really the where to go. And I think also, honestly, today, almost a breeder should not care if it's a microsat, if it's a SNP, if it's an FLP or KIT-ARTS. I think what people need to be trained on is that, okay, I have these genotypes and I need to cross these to maximize my genetic gain. So it's really about usability of the data. And even as I said in my provocative statement, analyzing data. You still need to really train people on how they calculate heritability, adjusted mean, special analysis, blobs, all what you want. Well, it's a question. And again, I don't claim that, that should forget about it. But it's a bit this dilemma those days. Do you want your kids to know how to spell things and spend a lot of time on spelling? Or you provide them the tool where they go there and they click and, the text is corrected. So data interpretation, the output, and how you integrated this in your system to become more efficient is there. So there is a trade-off. Not the black box, absolutely. Local infrastructure to show people who are interesting. But the focus is really, again, from our perspective, on what do you do with the data independently for where it comes and how it has been generated.
Earl Kellogg from the University of Illinois in the Soybean Innovation Lab Advisory Board. I think I got that right, Pete. Right? I really appreciate this. As you may have thought, the first question I asked, that I believe capacity building is extremely important. And clearly you have done a very thorough job of thinking about this and putting platforms in place and thinking about sustainability, et cetera. And it's focusing on training and education of individuals and networks and all that. One of the things we've learned in capacity building too is that educating and training people is very important in institution building. But it's necessary but not sufficient. There's more to institutional development than just educating people and getting networks presented, et cetera. And institutions outlive people most times. And so the whole idea of institutional development and capacity building is extremely important. And that's going to be, I think, a challenge for all of us as we think about the sustainability, not only the Soybean Innovation Lab research and work, but development work in general. So I'm encouraged by this. I'd like for us to also think about the institutional development part of capacity building as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a fundamental issue, and it's part of this issue of technology adoption, you know, because I think we need to have the buy-in from the institution themselves. And in the first phase, we focus more on the people to identify champions, people who can stand up and tell the others how, you know, what is their experience and etc. I don't know if you remember, because this is a slide, in fact. I'm lucky. Here, this part here, when we want to approach an institution in a broad sense, you know, a program or network or whatever, we have now developed a roadmap, you know, that we will first start to approach upper management and have their commitment that they want to adopt the BMS. And there is a back and forth with, then we go and analyze the needs of the institution. And we'll tell them, this is what you need to do if you really are serious about adopting the BMS, because it has some cost and implication. And then we come back to them and say, are you willing to sign? Are you willing to allocate the resources, human resources, the money to do this? And it's only when you go through this different step of interaction that we'll spend some time to really help them to adopt the BMS. And during second phase, we focus much more on institution, exactly along the line of what you said, to have this, you know, as a driver rather than the individual. So they have really the buy-in of the institution.
And there's a community of practice on institutional development that isn't necessarily linked to technical folks. And that, I've been concerned for some time that there's this group that really focus on institutional development. And then there's those of us who've been involved in agriculture development. And our paths don't meet very much. And I think we ought to think more about trying to bring those two communities together, because the institutional development is really important on the technical aspects, but there's a lot of other aspects that these people have studied and done research on and worked on that would be helpful as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Again, totally agree. And one of the dimensions that we are exploring now is to work through regional partners. So CORAF, for example, in West and East Africa, in fact, is going to be our partners to help tackling those upper director, you know, Minister of Agriculture in Africa. And in fact, we are going to establish regional hubs in Seras, in Senegal, but it's not us, it's CORAF. So again, CORAF is really very powerful in the regions. They are a bit the one making this bridge between the politician, the decision maker, and the scientific community. And again, this is just, you know, something new, and there is FARA anniversary in a couple of weeks in South Africa. We'll be there, and we will present with CORAF. So it's also building on some partners who are in this business of linking the politics and the science, that we believe we can be really efficient. And then they have a much larger stick, because it's easy. I can tell you, yes, we have some of those folks, they sign, you know, we put the time, and after this, it's gone. And what are we going to do? Now again, CORAF, with his budget for 120 million allocated to the regions, to those same people, I hope that they can help us also to enforcement and to help, you know, disseminating the message, and again, bring the institution and upper management on board.
Hi, Kristen Ballou, USDA, ARS, and also University of Missouri. One thing that comes to me from your presentation is a little bit of the cart before the horse, which I think was alluded to about the situation in the labs in our target countries. And so I think the software that you mentioned is really what I call in the discovery arena. So if I'm a soybean breeder or researcher and I want to discover traits or QTLs and identify markers to breed for them, I would be well trained if I took your course and I could go do that scientific work. And then we have the case of the actual station managers in our breeding situations who are trying, in my mind, to deploy that knowledge. And so what I'm looking for is more of the deployment capacity at the station, not row spacing or fertilizer, but actually someone has discovered an important QTL for a trait, and I have a very specific example for pod shatter. We think the answer for pod shatter is available, but how do we get that into the breeding stations management so that they can screen their parents or screen their populations? So do you have the capacity building at the deployment level?
So, I mean, again, I'm sorry if I gave the impression that this is more about genetics and genomics. The principal objective of the platform, in fact, is just to change for writing the data by hand with an electronic capture. This is really our first target objective, you know, having this cultural change of going to electronic data capture and management. So nothing to do with the marker, with the genes, etc. How you can manage your field efficiently, how you can capture your data so that you have a database, so when you leave, you know, the national program, the country, somebody else can come and find it. So it's primarily about data management. Then it's about making crosses and breeding, and you find all your tools. And then it is about, you know, if some people want to access markers, QTL, and etc. So I think that's really important to keep this in mind. We cover, and it's a challenge, a broad range of user, really from the very simple and basic breeding activities. And your point, I think it's absolutely fundamental. In the station, there are what we call them technicians. For me, I make station managers more from agriculture practice, agronomy practices. Then you have the technician, who are the one capturing the data and et cetera. And then you have the scientists that you know, are leading this. And I think this is a technician that needs to be trained to really understand what the purpose is in terms of data collection, quality control, and et cetera. And I think that's what we try to do, and why we have also those different level of deployment. Now, if we have the resources, I mean, one of my major challenge now is to try to attract new funding, because we basically supported for phase 2 the support of the platform. And we have put already some regional hubs. We have 4 hubs in Africa so far. IIT is the regional hubs, Africa Rice, CERAS, as I said, and Beka, and we are establishing one in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. But of course, all this system, you can scale it up easily, and we don't have the resources now. We are just putting the bases, and hopefully the model is attractive, and people and policymakers or donors will be willing to invest to scale it up. Because yes, if we want to make really the follow-up on the ground, well, it will need quite some resources. So it's a model that is started at quite a low scale, and again, depending on the success and the demand, we'll scale it up. And one idea is also that we will generate, I mean, if you have SMEs and et cetera, I mean, there is a business model behind this also to have some income with private sector and et cetera to make it more sustainable. Well, there is quite a number of things that we have also in mind. It's not only asking money for donors, but also to make it more self-sustainable.